Good evening, everybody. Well, it may not be evening actually when you're checking this out, but it's evening right now. And this is Mr. Smith, and we are going to talk about photosynthesis today. So, this presentation, as you can see there, is actually done by Kessler Science. That's who we use for our stations labs. And so, we're going to go with his notes, which is going to coincide and go right along with our other work that we're looking at. So, our essential questions is how does radiant energy from the sun change into chemical energy through the process of photosynthesis in a green plant? That's a lot of big words. Let's break that down. So, how does radiant energy being the energy we feel from the sun. So when you feel that warmth when you're standing out in the sunlight, that's actually the radiant energy from the sun hitting us, and we perceive it to be heat. It's actually radiation. Um, it's okay. Just don't get too much. That's when you get sunburnt, right? So, how does the energy or the we feel as heat from the sun change into chemical energy? Now, chemical energy is talking about a chemical compound. So, we've gone from a non physical thing to something that's actually physical. So, we've gone from like light and radiation, and we feel as heat. And now all of a sudden, we're talking about it being in chemical energy in the form of a chemical. Um, I've been drinking a fruit smoothie. That's chemicals. Most of the time, people think of chemicals as things like bleach or, ooh, they can hurt you. But that's not always what chemicals are. Actually, the air that we breathe is a chemical. So, um, and then, so how do we convert that light into chemical energy through the process of photosynthesis in a green plant? And that's actually what photosynthesis is. Photosynthesis is taking um, light energy from the sun, water, and carbon dioxide, and then converting it into a chemical that they can use for um, energy. Namely, they're going to turn it into sugars. So, um, and then how does the law of conservation of mass relate to photosynthesis? Now, reminder, or I guess a recap. The law of conservation of mass says if you start with one of something, you have to show where that one of something ends up. It still has to be there. It cannot disappear. And you cannot end up with more than you started with. So if you start off with one over here, you have to end up with one over here. You cannot start with one and end up with two. That defies the law of conservation of mass. And you don't break the law because you know what happens. It's bad. Don't break the laws. So, that being said, let's look at what radiant energy is. And hopefully, I can get myself out of the way here. There's no good place. There we go. All right. So, the sun's radiant energy is a form of kinetic energy. Kinetic just means it's in motion. It travels by waves or particles, and light has this weird, funky duality, which basically is a fancy way of saying it behaves like it's light, a wave, and it behaves like it's an actual particle. So it's kind of weird because things don't normally do that. But this light is what makes life on Earth possible. It moves through space. Um, it can be absorbed, transmitted, or reflected. And then visible light energy is vital for plants to make their own food. So, why are plants green? I was taking a moment there to pause to let you look over the notes. Some of you are probably writing some stuff down here, and so that's a good thing. So we'll take a little extra time now and then, and you can also pause the video. I should have mentioned that from the get-go. Um, but looking at photosynthesis, why are plants green? Well, if we look at light through a prism, and I have shown some of you this in class for the like 2 weeks we were there, but if you take a prism, which is a triangular piece of usually glass or plastic, and you hit a light beam into it, it's actually going to break the light into 7 colors, so it makes a rainbow. So we see the same thing, which is what a rainbow is, right? So like when sunlight actually hits into a um, water droplets. What I had a brain fart there. When light hits into the rain, the sun comes down and hits the rain droplets and all the moisture that's in the air. It actually gets diffracted and diffused, and spread out. And that's how we see these seven colors. And that's how scientists say, well, light's actually seven colors. And if you break it apart, then you see all seven colors rather than just seeing white light. So chlorophyll absorbs most of the colors of the visible light spectrum except green. So green is reflected, so we see green. So whatever color you see is what's actually being reflected. The other colors are being either completely absorbed or absorbed by and large, right? So you've got, we all know there's different shades of red and that sort of thing. So if you've got red being reflected, but then a little bit of some other color, it's going to affect how we perceive that red. And if we look at that bottom picture on the left there where it says red surface, you can notice that red is reflected from the flower um, and green from the leaf. So actually, that's the center picture. Sorry. Um, Nonetheless, whatever color is reflected, that means the other colors are either completely or at least in part being absorbed. Now, it's not easy being green. That's what Kermit the Frog says. Um, Sorry, you can't unsee that or unhear that. So, if we illustrate how visible light makes a plant's leaf look green, remember Roy G. Biv. That's red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, and those are in order the seven colors that we see in a rainbow. That's going to help you remember all seven colors. So, photosynthesis, we got to talk about reactants and products. So, there are three reactants that are needed for a plant to make its own food, or in other words, undergo photosynthesis. They have to have energy from the sun, they have to have water and nutrients from the soil, and they have to have carbon dioxide from the air. Now, this food making process is called photosynthesis. This only occurs during the daylight hours in most plants, but let's investigate further into how this process works. That's the wrong direction. All right, here we go. So, light hits chlorophyll, and which is inside of a chloroplast. Lots of new words here; those are fun. A chlorophyll is a pigment inside of the organelle known as a chloroplast. It's actually the chlorophyll that makes it look green. The sun or light from another source hits the leaves. The pigment chlorophyll is found, like I said, in the chloroplast, and that allows the plant to absorb the light energy of the other colors except for green. Green is reflected. That's why we see green. And this only occurs in leaves. Now, in terms of water and nutrients, we have to look at how the plant gets those. And this kind of defies gravity. So there are two types of tissues. You've got the xylem. Xylem in, roll it, flow them out. Rawhide. Yep, I just did that. So the xylem is what transports water through a process called capillary action. If you've ever had blood drawn, or they've had to take, they did a finger prick and took that little tube and stuck it on your finger, and the blood went, and you were like, maybe you weren't like that, but that's actually a capillary tube, and that's called capillary action. When you have a very tiny tube, it's really, really super tiny. It makes like a liquid will stick to the inside of it, especially if it's polar, meaning it likes water. And blood is water, and obviously we're talking about plants here, so they're trying to get water, and there's stuff dissolved in the water and mixed into it, and so the water will actually stick to the inside of the phloem. I'm sorry, the xylem, and then as it also sticks to itself, so it actually helps the water look like it's climbing, but it's actually just sticking to the sides and then to itself. And then the water molecules bounce up, stick to the side, then to itself, side, self, side, self. And so the xylem is what's bringing water in from the roots all the way to the top. And if you think about it, that's actually pretty spectacular, because you look at a tree. There are trees in excess of 100 feet, and that the root system is 30 plus feet down. So that means that water has traveled through these tiny tubes in excess of 130 feet. That is crazy. Um, Phloem is what transports food throughout the plant, and these are found in what we call vascular plants. So remember, if you've ever heard that song, "Ride 'em in, roll 'em out, rawhide," that's what I was saying earlier. Xylem in, phloem out, rawhide. But in this case, we're talking about feeding the plant. So come up with your own part there. But it's xylem in, phloem out. I keep forgetting I don't need to wait. So here we're going to look at carbon dioxide and its role in photosynthesis. Carbon dioxide enters the leaf through a small opening called the stoma. And the plural of that is stomata. So if you're talking about one pore, it's a stoma. But if you're talking about many pores, those are called stomata. On either side of the stoma are guard cells, and that's what's being pointed out right here. Those guard cells control the opening and closing of the stoma. And basically, what they do is they take in water, and that causes them to swell up. And then when they release that water, that allows them to flatten down, and it closes the pore up. So they can either take in water, excess water, and cause the stoma to open, or they can close the stoma and not and actually, what's the word I want to look at here? So they can actually reduce the rate of photosynthesis this way, because the plant has to have carbon dioxide, or photosynthesis doesn't occur, at least in most cases. So green plants remove tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere every single year. And this is evident in satellite imagery and some other maps and things that we have in botany and other atmospherical studies. So let's take a moment to reflect. You know now. I did say that backwards again. You now know part of the equation for photosynthesis. So we had to have water, carbon dioxide, and what was the third thing? You guys remember? If you said sunlight, you're correct. Those are the three things you have to have for photosynthesis. Also, what are the structures in the leaf that allows for these needed things? So there was a special tube that takes water up in, do you guys remember that word? Xylem. And then what's the tubes that carry the food throughout the plant? Remember, xylem in, and then flow out, phloem out. So the phloem is what carries the food throughout. And then what are those cells that guard the stoma? That's right, they're called guard cells. They guard the opening of the stoma, or the stomata, if we're talking about plural. And at least you're going to have many stomata on the obverse of the leaf. They're usually 99 times out of 100, they're on the bottom of the leaf. So let's look at the equation. If you've got carbon dioxide, water, and energy from the sun, this causes something to happen. And it's really the energy from the sun that causes it to kick off, and it's really making things unstable. And that's what usually drives chemical reactions, is instability. So if you can cause some stuff to get unstable, usually stuff will start happening. The ingredients for making food in green plants can be written in a chemical equation. The first part of the equation for photosynthesis is written below. So we got to have those three things. Then we go to making sugar, as I noted earlier. And they also make O2, which is oxygen gas. That's how it typically is naturally found. And so that's what we breathe, we need out of the air that we inhale. Remember, when we breathe in, we're breathing in more than just oxygen. There are lots of gases in the air. We don't just breathe oxygen, we breathe air, and air has a lot of different gases in it. So in a chemical equation, these two things are the products of the chemical reaction. So if you've got water, sunlight, and what was the other thing? If you said carbon dioxide, you're correct. And then if you've got those three things, if you've got water, carbon dioxide, and sunlight, you end up making sugar and oxygen. So one type of sugar molecule that plants generally store their energy in is called glucose. Most of you, especially if you know anybody who is diabetic or has blood sugar problems, you've probably heard them say their blood glucose, and that's measuring this molecule that's in their bloodstream, how much is in there. That's usually a good indicator as to whether or not your pancreas is acting correct and your cells are taking up the sugar out of your bloodstream. So glucose is transported around the plant as soluble sugar. It's going to be going through the phloem at that point. Plants can turn glucose into starch for storage. So I actually made a boo-boo a minute ago. I said they store glucose. They actually starch is a long chain of glucose molecules. So if you put a whole bunch of glucose molecules in a chain together in a line, you'll make starch. Or at least we think that's the way it works. Cell walls in plants are made of starches, so gotta have them. Plants also use starches as a source of fuel. Now, photosynthesis again has to have CO2. It gives off oxygen. Oxygen is a byproduct, meaning it's something that's released or given out. It's not used at all by it is, because plants also conduct cellular respiration, but we'll talk about that later on. The main thing the plant needs to do is conduct photosynthesis to make those sugars, but then it has to use those sugars to manufacture ATP. And again, we'll talk about that in the next unit. The O2 moves out of the plant through the stomata. The process of photosynthesis puts tons of oxygen back into the atmosphere every single day. So, back at the beginning of the year, we talked about some of the differences between reactants and products. Reactants are what react. Products are what's produced. So products are what's going to be what you end up with, and reactants are going to be what you mix together to make those products. If we name the three reactants of photosynthesis, again, they are carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight. And then the two products you get are glucose and what was the other one? Oxygen, yes. And remember, we don't just breathe in just oxygen, there are multiple gases in there. Excuse me. We don't have to cut out this template. You're not going to have it at home. So now that you've written the equation, make a quick sketch of this drawing on photosynthesis so you could pause it here to get that done. And a quick recap of the law of conservation of mass. It says mass is an isolated system and it is neither created or destroyed by a chemical reaction. The mass of the products must equal the mass of the reactants. The number of atoms on both sides must be equal. So, just looking here, this carbon there's no numbers in front of it, there's no numbers right below it. So there's one carbon. We look over here at this side. There's only one C. It has no numbers in front of it, no numbers right beside of it. So there's only one. So we started with one, we ended with one. Now, there's a 4 right here on this hydrogen. So that means there are 4 hydrogen there. I can't draw on here. Poop. Let's see. Can I draw? Oh, no. I can't. Okay. Sorry, guys. Oh, and I just clicked the wrong thing. Anyway, this is going to be a carbon. You can see this black ball. That's the carbon. Each one of those little white things is a hydrogen. So you can actually see there's 4 hydrogen on that one, attached to that one carbon. Now, over here we see we have 2 H2O molecules. H2O is water. So the O would have to be the oxygen because there's only one oxygen. So there's one. And it says there are 2 hydrogen. and there's 1, 2. And again, it says there are 2 of those. 1, 2. So we have 2 total H2O molecules. So if we had 4 hydrogen over here, and then here we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So we started with 4, we end with 4, we're good. Now, when we have to balance the equation for photosynthesis, we do have to do a little bit of math here. So you don't just start with just 1 carbon dioxide molecule and 1 water molecule to end up with 1 glucose molecule and 6 oxygen molecules. You actually have to have 6 carbon dioxide molecules, which every time you take a breath, there are several million molecules of carbon dioxide in that single breath. And there's even more coming back out because it's being pulled out of your body from waste products of cellular respiration. So it's quite complicated. Yeah, quite complicated. All right. So to review, explain the law of conservation of mass. So if you start with 1, you have to end with 1. If you start with 2, you got to end with 2. You can't start with 2 and end with 1. You can't start with 1 and end with 2. They got to be the same number on both sides. And by both sides, I mean both sides of the arrow. So you have to have the same on the reactant side as you do on the product side. So you got to write the balanced equation for photosynthesis. So it's 6CO2 plus 6H2O yields C6H2O. I'm sorry, C6H12O6 plus 6O2. Wow, I really messed that up. I'm sorry. Again, you can flip back, rewind in the video here, but there's the balanced equation. 6CO2 plus 6H2O yields, that's what that arrow means. And you got to have the sunlight coming in there. And you get C6H12O6 plus 6 molecules of O2. So come up with a clever way to help you remember this. Everybody's going to be different. Share your idea with a partner. See if they figured something out if you haven't. And then cellular respiration, if you look, I mentioned this earlier, this is what humans have to do. So we take sugar and carbon dioxide, and oxygen, and we make carbon dioxide, water, and energy. That energy is ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And if you notice that this formula is just the reverse of photosynthesis. So if you flip this back around and change this energy just happens to be sunlight, you've got photosynthesis if you flip it. So to unlock the energy in the glucose produced by photosynthesis, green plants need to respire. Respiration creates energy for growth, reproduction, and other life processes, for homeostasis, and a multitude of other things. Unlike photosynthesis, respiration happens both day and night. So, can you do this? I hope so. If you can't, go back and watch this video again. I hope this has been helpful for you, children, and we are going to sign off here. I hope this has been helpful. I hope you've learned something. If you have any questions, post them in the class stream, and I will hopefully see you guys in the new year. Take care, and I hope to hear from everybody soon. Goodbye.